Hi, everybody, and welcome to today's LinkedIn Live. My name is Siobhan Fagan. I'm the Senior Managing Editor at Reworked, and I am really excited to be having this conversation today with Ryan Anderson. He is the Vice President of Research and Insights at MillerKnoll. He's got over 30 years of experience in this industry, and he is just a very eager practitioner and sharer of information on the topic we're saying today. So I am going to just dig right in on our topic, which is making the return to office work. You maybe have been talking about this a little bit, Ryan, but I'm going to start with kind of a different angle, which is why return to an office at all?
Yeah, good question. First of all, hi, it's great to see you, my friend. Thanks for having me. I've never done a LinkedIn Live, so I'm pretty excited about this format. Yeah, that's the question we should be asking. It's actually a really good question. And even though I work in the furniture industry and I work with a lot of architects and interior designers and others whose jobs are contingent upon having a thriving world of commercial real estate, it's good for us to go back to basics. Like, why do we need offices in a world of workplace, in a world of on-demand workplace and a world of remote working? And should we even define workplace the same as we once did? I'm not sure it's synonymous with offices anymore. The simple answer is they can be fantastic vehicles for strengthening organizational culture and for bringing groups of people together into a more cohesive community that can accomplish more together. It's totally possible to originate an organization that is completely remote. You know, one of my favorite collaborators is Darren Murph at GitLab, head of remote at GitLab. GitLab's an example of you can do it without a lot of physical space, but even most remote first companies invest in good quality physical space. They might not call them offices, but they're still wonderful places to come together. And a very small percentage of people, I think certainly under 20%, of the 10,000 people that we survey every quarter as part of this initiative called Future Form, fewer than 20% want to be solely remote. So people want a chance to gather. They want a chance to be part of something. If I take the answer a little deeper and make it more applicable to what's happening in the world right now, if you look at the health of organizational networks, they're often kind of fractured. So we feel, many of us feel like we've been having video calls and interactions with the same 20 people, like our immediate work team, what sociologists would call our strong ties, but might be very disconnected from dozens or hundreds of people that are part of our extended network, or what sociologists call our weak ties. What that produces in an organization is lots of cohesion among very small groups, but a real lack of cohesion between those groups. So it starts feeling like an organization might consists of dozens or hundreds of disconnected small companies rather than a cohesive whole. So the physical workspace, actually physical space period, has always been great for being able to bring people together, to connect them, ideally to help them encounter each other's work, and to strengthen communities that can go collaborate better together when their work is increasingly digital.
Can I ask then, from what we've seen so far, and obviously a lot of companies are still kind of going back and forth. They're sort of in the office, they're sort of not, depending on where they are in the world. Some of them are potentially, cutting back on the office time, but are they intentionally, and that's the key word, I guess, here, are they intentionally creating these spaces that promote those stronger organizational networks that build up those weak ties, or where are they with that?
They're moving towards it. Here's the interesting and maybe ironic side of this. Many organizations that have said that they're remote first have had to more rapidly reevaluate whether or not they want physical space and what to do with it. And if I look at companies like Okta or Atlassian, companies that have said to their employees, you don't ever have to come back to the office, in many cases, they've expanded their real estate portfolio or made them better. That I don't even know if they'd always call them offices, because what it forces them to do is to say, well, if we're going to invest in physical workplace, it needs to be something that our employees truly value and need. By the way, that is the big arc. If there's like one big transition happening in the world of workplace. It's that the workplace is becoming what the employees want it and need it to be. Other organizations that are taking a much more incremental approach haven't achieved that yet. Those organizations that have said, hey, we want you either back in the office full time or back in the office a few days a week, are probably on the journey. If they look at what they're spending on corporate real estate, they're probably beginning to say, well, how do you, like, what's the measure of success? Is it only occupancy levels, or is it in fact a different measure around how valuable are these spaces to people? Like, do they actually find them useful? Do they enable experiences that people would just struggle to have at home if home was the only option? And of course, not everybody can work effectively from home. So it's highly varied. The good news is even the more, I guess I'll call them traditional ones, are actively prototyping and trying new things. We see organizations moving away from just having a sea of desks. Like if you look at I'm just going to stereotype here for a second, but if you look at a traditional office design, sea of desks, very generic 12-person conference rooms, and you say, well, what are those spaces really good for? Like, what's a conference room really good for? Is it good for group co-creation? Is it great to be on video? Is it great for brainstorming? Is it great for one-on-one employee meetings? The office had become very generic. It was trying to be everything to everybody at the lowest cost possible. That's not a recipe usually for high performance. And so
it's a great recipe for selling noise canceling headphones.
Yeah, and we do have friends that do that, by the way. We've had great partnerships with organizations like Logitech and Jabra and others over the years. But organizations are taking those spaces and saying, well, maybe we could try some of the conference rooms becoming project rooms. Maybe we could pull some of those desks off and put some social spaces in. The type of space design is important, but actually by far the most important thing is if they're able to engage their employees in the process. Because this is the big question, right? Like if the workplace needs to become what the employees need it to be, the days of hiring the Starchitect to come in and say, this is what the office wants to be is over. The best architects, the best interior designers are those that can come in and say, we're going to help you figure out what your people really need. And it needs to be a much more participative process. So I would say that even among those that are maybe not radically transforming their spaces, they're learning to be more participative. And that's good. That's a recipe for success long-term, even if it takes them longer to get there.
So I want to pull out this a little bit when you're talking about an office becoming what the employees need it to be, because that's a radically different approach from what we've had. I mean, I don't think many employees would have want to go back to the open office plan of yesteryears, et cetera. But I hate to pull out the old Ford quote, but it's sort of like, if you ask people what they wanted, they'd ask for a faster horse instead of the automobile. Do employees know what they want? And in a fractured organization where it's multiple teams, how do you get that space for multiple teams to actually be able to work well?
Yeah, the good news is there are design approaches that balance, and it really is a balance, the needs of very specific individuals and teams with the needs of the whole. If you ask most people if they knew what they want in terms of office design or workplace design, no. But I do think we can actively talk to people about their experiences and how they're working differently. So how effectively do you feel like you're working from home? To what extent do you struggle with certain activities? Are there certain experiences that you feel like you would like to prioritize? By the way, most people would tell you they're very productive working from home, even those that have very ill-suited home workspaces. And by the way, our goal is to support work wherever it happens. So we're as passionate about creating great work from home spaces as we are office spaces. But there's also some interesting patterns that are arising. Often people only associate their productivity with their individual work as opposed to being social and having group work. And if you scratch a little bit deeper, you'll see that people do in fact struggle with social isolation, sometimes with burnout. Burnout and working remotely are commonly associated things. And sometimes organizations will get way too far down the path of scheduling way too many video meetings, way too many synchronous meetings. So if you start asking employees about what it would take for them to be more productive, but also have a healthier balance between working and living activities, I do think most are quite aware. And that's good input for what an office wants to be. I'll give you an example. We have a One of our brands within MillerKnoll, Herman Miller, has a work from home tool, wfh.hermanmiller.com. 26,000 people have used it globally. Not a sales tool. It's just like an ergonomic assessment. It includes things like, do you have plants? Do you have natural light? The number one cited issue people still say they have is the ability to have focused productivity at home. You dig a little bit deeper, it's not that people can't be productive, and it's not that you can't ever focus at home, but I'm kind of laughing right now because it's summertime here in Michigan. My kids are off from school. My wife works at their school, so I got a whole troop going on here today, plus the dog. Sometimes maybe the Wi-Fi is cutting in and out. Maybe other days you need 2 or 3 hours with a spreadsheet, and you're just concerned that somebody you're helping to care for or whatever might need your attention. And so for some people, going in and having truly heads down work, get away from everybody, might be what the office needs to be for them. Others might feel highly disconnected from their boss, from management. They just need to feel like they need to know what's going on in the company. And so having social spaces that feel less hierarchical or more equitable, more egalitarian might be what they're seeking. And the goal here basically, Siobhan, is you take a look at those patterns, and then you take a look at how to begin to allocate types of space. You can have a quiet heads down study hall that's shared by everybody in one corner. You can have a really awesome kick-ass coffee bar in another. And what it does is it pushes us away from the middle of the parabolic curve, right? So like if rows of desks and conference rooms were just like this narrow generic middle, what it might mean is that the space needs to offer things that are far more purposeful, far more intentional, and optimized for the sort of things that you just can't do at home very well. Like, would I build an office where people came in to do email, video calls, and expense reports? Probably not. But would I build a space to come in and give people a chance to hang out with their teammates, bump into some people that they don't see very often, and get away from everybody for some serious, quiet, heads down work? Sure, that's good investment.
So we see a lot of businesses trying and in the process kind of angering their employees. And there's obviously a few things going on there. I would assume there's a lack of employee listening, which you're pointing out repeatedly is a huge part of this. But I'm wondering what other errors you see organizations doing and what the antidotes are for those errors.
That's a great question. We could dedicate the whole call to that question, by the way. And I should provide a primer, which is MillerKnoll is a founding partner of a group called Future Forum, along with Slack, Boston Consulting Group, and Management Leadership for Tomorrow. And a lot of my answer will be based on the work that we do. We survey 10,000 people every quarter globally, as well as do lots of executive roundtable working sessions on different topics. Excuse my cough. My allergies are in full swing. There's a few things that come to mind. One, if you look at the experience scores among employees that have been forced into the office full-time, they're quite low. It's not necessarily the office, but it's the fact that there are people that feel like much of the world is working more flexibly, and employers are trying to give their employees more autonomy while my bosses are forcing me into the office. And at the heart of that is a concern around control and autonomy. And so if I were talking to the CEO of an organization that wanted to improve upon their return to office, I would say that try to not fall into the trap of communicating compliance as the primary value. Like, think about it. Why are you asking people to spend time in the office? And be transparent about you and the culture of your organization and your leadership style. Is it that you grew up with the ability to supervise work, like literally supervise what was happening, and it feels like a loss of control for you when you can't? Or is it that you've got this major investment in real estate and you just feel like you need to use it? Or, I don't know, is it a sincere concern over a lack of cultural cohesion, a lack of belonging? And then make sure, this is the next part, Siobhan, is make sure that the communication strategy is really well thought out. I think there's a huge difference between saying, we've reviewed our policy, we think that you need to be in the office 3 days a week, please communicate with your work team leader what days those are, versus saying to an employee, hey, our culture is really important, and you are a key contributor to the culture. We've got some new employees. We've got people that might be feeling disconnected. Can you please invest time in others together in the space a couple days a week, or the equivalent of a couple days a week? By the way, the whole couple days a week thing drives me nuts, because it's making a bunch of assumptions about how and where people might want to work. If you look at the number one group requesting flexibility, working parents, you might find that it's not 2 or 3 days a week. You might find that it's, let me do some emails at 8, drop off the little ones at 8:50, get into the office at 9:30, leave at 2, pick them up at 2:45, and I'm going to take a video call after I get home. It might be that it's a 5-day a week, but 4-hour a day or 5-hour a day, whatever is right for them. But ultimately, the most successful organizations, what they're really doing is that they're decentralizing and de-aggregating assumptions about how work gets done. And they're allowing teams and even individuals to take more control over their productivity. And so if the communication is, we want to support more flexibility, we also want to make sure that you're achieving at a high level. Our performance goals are going to be based on, our performance management is going to be based on goals. Like, we're going to set goals for you in terms of what you need to accomplish. And then our technology, our places, our processes, they're meant to enable you to reach those goals. The office is a critical part of that. And we believe that you'll reach those goals better as part of a community. It's just a totally different approach. So kind of fleshing out those values, communicating effectively, and then doing what I just said, which is presenting the office back to the employees as a resource and saying, these are spaces that have been designed to support these activities. As you consider what it looks like to chart out your own work week, consider when the work will be best done here. Or maybe the work's best done at home. Maybe the work's best done at a co-working space or a coffee shop. It's really empowering you as an employee to take charge of your own productivity, with the understanding that to whom much is given, much is expected. We're holding you accountable. Showing up, presenteeism, is no longer counting as productivity. Like, we're going to give you goals. It's up to you to manage reaching those goals, communicate the status, be inclusive, make sure you're seeking role clarity. So it is really a two-way street. Yeah. But the summary of what I guess I'm trying to say is, if anybody thinks that it's a policy-driven thing just tucked into, like, I don't know, the offices are open again, they're probably missing the bigger picture and the bigger opportunity.
They're trying to roll back to 2019 is what they're trying to do.
And by the way, that's exactly what the employees don't want. So if you look at the request for more flexibility, 79% of the employees surveyed want more flexibility about where they can work. 94% want more flexibility with when. And when you talk about future of work, I had a conversation today, as an example, with Debbie Lovich from Boston Consulting Group. She's managing director there, and she leads their future of work consulting. The need for more flexibility transcends almost all work type, including desk workers or deskless workers, people working in labs, retail, manufacturing. And so people are pushing back against the 2019 work week. I have to confess, as somebody who is at a company where a decent amount of our revenue comes from offices, I worry the office is like a casualty in all this.
It's a good thing we're not on a public forum with this discussion.
Well, this is one of the reasons why I love to celebrate just how amazing offices can be for organizations that embrace them differently, because this may in fact be the key to unlocking a far, far better future for offices. And for us, a much less commoditized, much more interesting, much more purposeful approach to the office. But you put your finger on it. Employees don't want to slide back into 2018, slide back into 2019. It's about having more control over being productive and letting work fit into your life, as opposed to vice versa, or even work-life balance, to me, which as a phrase seems antiquated now. It's let's be productive, but let's make it part of the lives that we want to live.
Yeah. So I just want to introduce you again for anybody in our audience who maybe came in late. I am speaking with Ryan Anderson. He is the Vice President of Research and Insights at MillerKnoll. We are talking about making the return to office work. And I'm going to throw a question at you that came earlier, which is, what does an ideal in-office day look like, Ryan?
I think it's highly varied. I think it's one that provides an employee a much greater degree of choice over what sort of experiences they might find if they make the commute to the office. So I would say it begins with a decision among the employee or the team that the office will help them be productive on a given day, right? So if my day is filled with administrative emails, expense reports, I'm probably going to do it from home. Likewise, if I think I'm going to take video meetings all day long individually, I might do that from home too. But it begins with saying, oh, there's certain activities, like as an example, asynchronous collaboration tends to occasionally hit a wall where you just need to talk through some stuff. Maybe you want to spend some time with coworkers, new employees, adjacent teams that you haven't seen as much, and spend some quality time with them. So it might begin with coming in, spending some time in what feels like a really social area where you're going to see people that you haven't seen in months or years, strengthening those weak ties. It's those moments like, how you been? What's going on? Like, what'd you do for your summer? And then, oh, what are you working on? And you slowly go from the social reconnections to the, I have a little bit better sense of what's actually happening in my organization. Then it might be moving into like a team neighborhood. Team neighborhoods are usually a mix of little spaces that are dedicated just to a team. So there you're likely to see your closest colleagues, but instead of sitting on an hour-long Zoom call with them, it's a chance to be like, hey, have you ever thought about this? Ask somebody a stupid question, grab some lunch, talk to them a little bit about questions you've been thinking about. Far less structured, more immersive, chance for tacit learning, just quality time, basically quality work time. And then maybe it's, I got a PowerPoint deck that I know I have to prepare in order to be on a Reworked podcast or a webinar, or maybe it's a spreadsheet that I know I've got to share with, the controller here in 2 days. And I'm going to go and I'm going to find a really, really quiet heads down space. And maybe in between, I even find a little space where I can just sit and be quiet and deal with whatever life anxieties or whatever issues might be on my mind. But you see what I'm getting at here. It's a variety of experiences that go way beyond sitting at a desk. It's a space that's intuitively navigated. So you go, I get it. I see what they've provided me here. I know what I've got and I know when to leverage those. And I would be remiss if I didn't say that there's some eating involved. When I go into our customer sites to take tours, I look for evidence of life among the teams. Plastic utensils are one of them. Where you say, oh, this group's been eating together a little bit, or maybe there's some ghosting on a whiteboard. Somebody's been over here sketching a little bit. And if I go to our offices in Paris as an example, it's absolutely unacceptable to work from your desk over the course of the lunch hour. Paris is one of those markets, by the way, where return to office hasn't been a big a deal. There is an understanding about the value of being in shared space amongst that culture there. There's a lot of markets, actually, that aren't struggling with return to office. And so got to eat together, right? Maybe wrap up the day a little early and go for a beer.
Yeah.
But there's mine.
I like it. You're a forensic office scientist.
Well, we are ethnographers. I mean, that's part of our research. Like we do amazing quant research, but we do ethnography. Like we observe. And when you see patterns of behavior, it's really powerful. In fact, that reminds me, I'm all over the place today, my friend, but that reminds me of another thing, which is employees should feel like they have control over some aspects of the space. Like they should be able to reconfigure some things. If I look to our ethnographic research over the years, there have been a lot of attempts to make offices that people can reconfigure a little bit, but they haven't always worked, including experiments that we've done at MillerKnoll and our other companies. But then other times it's worked really successfully. So if we look as an example at things like whiteboards or movable walls or chairs, they need to be of a certain scale in order for people to feel like they can move them. It needs to be intuitive to convey control and agency, but they also need to imagine what they might do with them, which is one of the reasons why if you go into like a big conference room with all these mobile tables, they may or may not get moved. It's up to it. Does the employee actually have a vision of what else this space could be for them? And so I didn't mention it in my description of the perfect day, but just know that somewhere along the way, there's this sense of if this space isn't quite what I need it to be, I feel comfortable making it what I need it to be because that's why it exists. I'm the customer, the head of real estate or facilities is the product manager, the space is the product. And I understand that this is for me, which historically has not always been the case.
Yeah. So I have so many points that I could follow up on with you. the whole productivity and how productivity works individually and collectively. Going to set that aside. We've got about 5 minutes left.
Oh my gosh, I talk so much.
We're good. I think we could have gone for an hour though. But the point that I'd really, really like to do to kind of hone in on, just as sort of parting advice for our audience, is how can they be the ethnographers in their companies? How can they get that employee listening factor in beyond just the typical surveys and things like that? How can they respond to changes in the environment? So what would you advise?
Yeah, a couple things. First, don't be afraid to be very reductive in how you view the space. And what I mean by that is just ditch your old idea of what an office needs to be. And just start with, if we were to create a space today for the first time, we went and signed a lease, and we told our employees, hey, we're going to create something that's really valuable to you. What do you think it would be? If you really don't know the answer to that, you need to begin doing focus groups. Surveys are helpful, but also do focus groups. Get the employee voice heard. Let the employees know they have a voice. Include employees that are well networked so that they can also share that this is happening, or go broad in terms of what you might ask. I know that's a little bit scary in terms of thinking about synthesizing all that information, but you'll see patterns arise. And then do a gut check. If you see a design of a space and you go, I'm not really sure I know what that's designed for, or if you see the technology provisioning a space and you go, I'm not exactly sure I feel comfortable using it, or if the space just fundamentally seems undesirable, you need to go with that. Like, imagine yourself as a restaurateur. People can cook from home, but you're designing a space that you want them to come to and have an enriching cultural experience. So I would just say those new set of lenses are really, really important, and ultimately help to craft processes that create an agile environment that can adapt, but ultimately that it's there to help employees have experiences that you think they'll struggle with elsewhere. And that's the way that the office in particular grows in its value. The interesting thing is, I believe that when those transformation happens, it actually increases demand. So we might see office occupancies go up. You might have a new problem to deal with in the future, but it's very different than the ones we've had in the last year, isn't it? Where people aren't exactly sure how to get people back into the office. And if I'm being really blunt, the employees aren't exactly sure what the office is there to do in this new world of work. But we can solve that.
Yeah, I think part of it is employees are picking up that their leaders don't understand what the office is for in those cases, where if they're coming in, it's a poor communications, but I think also if the layout is saying, like, you're here to do the exact same thing that you're doing at home, it's like, well, why am I here? What's the factor there?
It definitely feels redundant. And then I know we have very little time left. I'll put a teaser out there. If somebody wants to really push on this, like really take it to a new level, they can begin looking into what's known as inclusive design. And the idea of inclusive design is, I'm going back to that parabolic curve. Instead of designing a space for like the middle, you begin to take a look at like the full range of users and what kind of unique needs they have and how to create spaces that address those needs. And you might find that if you've got somebody who's got an anxiety disorder on the neuro spectrum, maybe it's a woman in menopausal years having brain fog, whatever, and you create a really quiet, contemplative zone that the entire employee population goes, I like that. I want more of those. So inclusive design is a way of saying, my typical user isn't typical. I'm not going to hone in on one group or another. I'm going to start getting really broad and looking at the conditions I'm solving for. And then when you push the boundaries on how to solve for some of those, sometimes it unlocks magic in terms of creating better experiences for everyone. And that's, in 10 years, I think that's what we'll still be talking about. It's exciting.
10 years, you think we're still going to be having this conversation?
Oh, the future is Paul Sappho. Never mistake a clear view for a short distance. How's that for a quote?
That's a quote, man. And scene.
I mean, it's true. These are leases we're talking about. They're not 1-year leases. They're typically 7 or 10-year leases. Now that's down to about 5.3 years in the US. It's shorter in Asia. People shouldn't wait for a lease event. They should be transforming their existing environments right now. It doesn't require a lot of capital, but by the time organizations learn a little bit about this, get the voice of the customer, start trying some things, see what they did right, see what they can grow. Yeah, I fully recognize that I'll be having conversations about how we're doing and what we're learning and how we're getting better probably as I enter into my retirement someday. But it's the right thing to do. It affects millions of people in their daily lives.
You're getting a couple of shout outs here in the comments. Somebody saying they love the simplicity of the just eat, drink together strategy. It's like, yep, it's sure. It's you see the food, people are sitting down, the conversations that they're having are building networks, and it's just good for mental health and good for the job too.
It is. And the restaurant analogy, again, because we don't have much time, I can't take it too far, but a good restaurant balances the experiences that it offers with a unique point of view, their cuisine, but also needs to be culturally appropriate for that area, something that is emerging as a theme in Europe, this topic of Baukultur, or the culture of buildings. How does the building fit in with our local culture? Organizations will begin to need to think of their offices this way. It needs to offer something unique. It needs to be right for the employees, and it does need to feel like it fits in with the local culture in a world where people move to where they want to live, and then they decide to find their employer after that. So again, we can go on about that one for a while, but not surprisingly, food and drink, those are often on my mind.
Always comes back to it. Well, thank you so much, Ryan. This too was my maiden LinkedIn live voyage. So thank you for joining me on it. Thanks for sharing your insights with our audience. And I hope to talk to you again soon.
You will. It's been a pleasure, my friend. And thank you all for tuning in.